I'm a trucker on a highway that doesn't exist. There are rules for surviving the road. Don't be alarmed if the road feels a few minutes longer every time you drive it. That's because it is. As the road lengthens, new side streets may appear. Do not take these, however alluring. Gas stations may pop up to fill in stretches of empty desert. Be wary of purchasing snack brands from them you have never heard of or that do not exist. Cacti will show up every few miles that weren't there on your last drive. These are just cacti. No need to fear the cacti. If your drive on Route 333 takes more than 30 minutes than the last time, report such fluctuations immediately. Multiple former employees who failed to report such anomalies are still stuck there, still driving. Employee Handbook, Section 7C. It was about the time I graduated from undergrad and finally braved checking on the empty void that was my bank account that I realized three things. Perhaps an English degree hadn't been the smartest choice for replenishing the aforementioned empty void that was my bank account. I could no longer live in student housing. I had utterly no idea what to do with my life. All of those, along with a healthy mix of typical Gen Z stress or depression, insert anxiety disorder here, were probably the reasons I responded to the advert in my mailbox for trucking positions along the Pacific coast. I didn't actually expect anything to come of my application, but the company responded immediately and offered to pay for a trip to go out and talk with them. I'd never been to California, so why not? Besides your typical interview questions, the only other thing they had me do was a skill assessment. All you have to do is take a freight truck to the turnaround point and come back. The interviewing manager, Randall, dangled a set of keys in front of me. He seemed like a nice enough guy, if a bit guarded. Not too difficult. You look like a competent boy. Don't I need a commercial driver's license? I'd actually driven the campus shuttle for 2 years during college, but it hadn't been a large enough bus to need a commercial license. I'd made that clear on my application. Do you think you're able to drive a rig of this size? Well, yeah, but... Then don't worry about it, Randall told me. How far is the turnaround? For most, it's 4 hours, but it could be less. That's what we're testing you on. So you want me to speed? In a 5-ton vehicle? That I don't have a license for? More like 15 tons and absolutely not. Don't speed. That would taint the results. We want to time how long it takes you naturally. The logic made no sense. Don't speed, but cross your fingers it goes quick? But it didn't matter anymore. The whole situation was sketchy. This was multiple levels of illegal, and federal prison wasn't what I imagined the keynote speaker meant by seize every opportunity in her graduation speech. I was steeling myself to tell all this to Randall and walk straight out of the office when, I forgot to mention, he said, $800 in compensation for your time. 10 minutes later, I was in the cab. Turning the key, I noticed another man, similar age to me, sitting in the idling cab of another semi just across the parking lot. Another applicant, Randall explained. It's easier for us if we time multiple of you at the same time. The other man gave me a friendly wave, then just as pleasantly flipped me off, which was such a confusing series of events. I decided to log it away for later to process fully. Dead meat, he mouthed, though it could have just as easily been red beets. What's the address of the turnaround? I asked, waving my phone to show the open Google Maps app. No phones, Randall said. Instead, he explained how I would recognize the turnaround point, a red-roofed, unmanned weighing station some way down Route 333, along with a few other basic guidelines. Don't use your phone for any reason, not even for music. Leave it on airplane mode, or better, just power it off. Even if there's an emergency, use the handheld radio. Do feel free to listen to the stereo, though. Station 86.9 FM is country if that's your thing, but probably steer clear of station 96.5.3, no picking up hitchhikers. Not even if they look like they're hurt. Not even if they're begging and crying for a ride, especially if they're begging and crying. Really, don't. Around halfway there, your rig will stall and come to a stop. Don't panic. Don't turn it off. Don't get out. Put it in park and wait exactly 1 minute and 47 seconds. After that, the engine should start back up. If, for some reason, the rig doesn't start after that time, well, it should. But if it doesn't? I asked. Hide, he said. Close your eyes until it does. But it should. Okay then. These are all spelled out with more details in the employee handbook, he told me when I, understandably, tried asking more questions. You shouldn't have to worry about most of them unless you get the job. Just don't use your phone, and most importantly, don't freak out when the rig stalls out. But how do you already know it's going? He raised his hands and shook his head to signal no more questions. $800, I reminded myself. There's something slightly soul-sucking in the realization of how low a price you can be bought for. Then again, there's something soul-sucking in being a broke, unemployed college grad, so pick your poison. One last thing, Randall tells me from underneath the window. Whatever you see, whatever happens, don't ever stop driving. Not at all ominous. He winked. I watched as the other interviewee pulled away first. My competitor. I decided now that I really did have a second to process his introduction. Twat. After I'd adjusted my mirrors and seat, I pulled out after him, highly aware of the timer in Randall's hand as he shrunk to a pinprick in my rear view. The most nerve-wracking part of the whole experience? No GPS, I wasn't worried about getting lost. The instructions were basically to drive straight on Route 333 until I arrived. But there was something disconcerting about knowing if I did get lost, I wasn't allowed to look up my location. I don't think I'd ever actually driven anywhere new without my phone. I already know what you boomers out there will say. My generation is soft. We never learned to do things the hard way. We're addicted to technology, to which I'll respond. True. Fair, really. But also you try giving up your iPhone. The first minutes of the drive went smooth. The highway was a bit twisty, but otherwise calm with a gorgeous view. Gargantuan trees, some variant of redwood I assumed, towered over me from every side, but pretty as it was, the two-lane road was practically deserted. No other cars passed me. None snuck up behind me. I flipped on my headlights to deal with the shade. It was a bit eerie, truthfully. After a while, I started catching glimpses of the competitor man's truck through the trees. I'd pass a bend, and his rig would flash between branches and trunks. He'd disappear around turns, but I was catching up. How to get around him? The road was thin, and if this was some sort of a speed race, there was no way he'd pull over to let me get by. Maybe another lane would open up soon. Maybe if I honked, it would spook him enough to let me pass. Turns out it didn't matter. Just as I was solidly behind him, my truck went silent. There was no sputter of life eking from a motor, nor the dying cough of an engine. The gas pedal simply stopped working. My rig slowed some more, then stopped. I was prepared for this. I waited. In my head, I counted. Randall had known. Somehow he'd known my rig would sputter out at some point, but he hadn't seemed concerned. Was it planned? Some way to see how we reacted in stressful situations? I found myself wildly looking around for a security camera. Don't be paranoid. Just like he'd told me, somewhere around second number 100, the engine roared back to life. My freight truck chugged forward, and when I applied gas, it sped up. All right then. The rest of the drive was blessedly uneventful. I never caught back up to competitor man, but smooth otherwise. At some point, the trees petered out to a short stretch of desert highway, and then the red-roofed weighing station. I slowed down and looked at the time. This couldn't be right. I'd only been driving for half an hour or so, and the other truck had never passed me. Randall had said it usually took several hours to get here. This couldn't be the correct place. It was, though. It had to be. I was still on the Route 333, I was sure of it. This was the first weighing station, and the description matched perfectly. I pulled out the digital camera Randall had given me and snapped a picture. If I was wrong, at least I could claim stupidity, not that I'd been trying to cheat. Maybe that would be enough. I maneuvered the rig through the unmanned station and headed back the way I'd come. Eventually, I reached the redwoods. The world transformed from sunlight back to shadow and mist. Tendrils of fog wafted above exposed roots. I'd be back in just a few minutes now. Then the truck started to slow. I swore. Not again. Sure enough, though, the rig came to a stop in a section of the forest so shaded it could have been evening. Bugs sped in and out of the headlight beams. Something was off. Nerves, I told myself. This whole thing is strange, so you're overthinking. That was usually the problem. Overthinking. Spiraling until I shut down. It was the reason I majored in a subject that let me be quiet and clack away on my laptop. It was the reason I got a job on the campus shuttle where I wouldn't have to talk to anybody and applied for this position in the first place. It had been building for months, years maybe, this feeling that something in my life was wrong, off. But after I'd gone through and eliminated the only things it could be, all I was left with was me. The thing that was broken was me, and maybe that wasn't something I could realistically run away from, but I could sure try. For the first time in months while driving Route 333, I'd felt normal in the thrill of the leaving something behind, but now I was stopped, stagnant, and it was all back again. And then another realization. How long has it been? I hadn't counted this time. There hadn't been a need after last time. But it felt like at least a few minutes had passed. Maybe? I started counting in my head. 20, 45, 60. I gave up. It had definitely been longer than a minute 47. The truck still wasn't moving. The first cold edges of true fear crept into me, up my spine and snaking around my heart. I waited some more. I swore some more. When neither of those delightfully brilliant options worked, I put the truck in park, cracked the door, and hopped down. Outside was chillier than I'd imagined. Weird. Sure, it was shady, but it was still summer. I considered trying to pop the hood of this thing. For some reason, all men, even those of us with no mechanical knowledge, feel a sense of control by ponderously examining broken engines. But for a massive beast like this, I couldn't pretend to know where to start. "Hello?" I called. In the mist, off in the distance, there almost looked like a figure. Fog rolled through and they vanished. Did they live around here? Maybe I could ask them for help. When the mist cleared, there was nobody. Hide. That's what Randall had told me, albeit offhandedly. Hide and close your eyes, but that just felt silly. Some way for him to distract me from realizing he'd stuck me with a crappy vehicle. Either way, I needed to go back in for my phone. Forget the rules, I was calling for help. The handle was locked. I rounded to the other side and tried that handle too. Locked. Incessant swearing might not have solved my problems the first 2 times. But no reason not to try in a third, right? The coldness clutched my heart until I could barely breathe. I watched as more mist rolled into the trees, and the figure, it was back, closer. For a second time, I almost called out for help. Hide! Before I could overthink my overthinking, before I could question how stupid I'd look, I dropped to my stomach and rolled under the truck. Then I squeezed my eyes shut. A set of footsteps approached the vehicle. I started to look up but stopped myself and pressed my face to the asphalt where I wouldn't be tempted. Another set joined it. Then another. They started moving faster, in no particular pattern around the rig. A dozen pittering dogs' feet, except heavier, more intentional. Frantic. Something tried at the door handles. I could hear the frustrated yank over and over. They were searching the area, looking for a way in. Don't look, don't look, don't! Above me, the engine roared to life. All at once, the 100 desperate footsteps stopped completely. I wasted no time. I rolled from my hiding spot, scrambled across the deserted road for the now unlocked door, and threw the rig into drive. Within seconds, I was hurtling back down the highway towards safety. That's it, I thought. I passed my twisted test, and now I get to return safely and refuse this sick job once and for all, and that was all true. I was safe. I would get to scream at Randall, just not before seeing what was behind the next turn. It came from nowhere. I swerved like crazy to avoid it. By the time I even processed what was obstructing the road, I'd already passed it with no chance of slowing back down. It had been my competitor's truck, totally stopped, diagonal across the whole road. And the man who'd been driving it? He'd been splayed across the hood, skewered through by a tree branch the length of a door. His eyes had been torn out. What was that? Now let's not get too excited. Randall looked up from his desk, back at the truck yard. What were those things? Who did that to the other guy? Other guy? He was stabbed by a tree. His eyes were literally empty sockets. Randall sighed. Not the sigh of, oh no, there's a crazy man yelling at me. The sigh of, oh great, more paperwork. Unit 50, he spoke into his handheld radio. There's a cleanup a few miles in. Sounds like a messy one. Maybe give it an hour to let the forest dwellers settle down before going in for a retrieval. Clean up? We have to call the police. We're not calling anybody. They prefer not to know about these things. We can't just leave him there." He held up his hands. "I know you're in shock, but as I said, let's try to calm ourselves. Yelling isn't helping anyone. I get it. We'll make sure to retrieve him. It's totally understandable why you'd turn back early." Early? For some reason, it was this odd, insignificant fact that finally yanked me from my frenzy. As unjust as murder might be to a recent graduate, nothing will ever top the injustice being failed on a test I know I passed. "I didn't come back early." His eyebrows pinched together. I pulled out the digital camera and shoved the image of the turnaround point in his face. Slowly, his expression opened up to one of shock and awe. "You were gone an hour, maybe an hour 30 at most." Randall considered. Then he stood, smiled, and stuck out his hand. "You've got a job. I've got a— What? Have you not been listening? I just saw a dead man. I nearly died myself. There's absolutely no way I'm accepting whatever joke of a job this is. 140,000 base, plus benefits and overtime. 10 minutes later, I was signing the offer. Go ahead. Hate me if you want. But never underestimate what you yourself wouldn't do under the weight of a 6-figure student debt. If you're going to be unhappy, no matter where you are, you may as well be unhappy and rich." It was only hours later, after my flight home, after I was safe in my bed on campus, and the whole interview felt like a distant nightmare, that I finally cracked open my new employee handbook. I found the section on the 1-minute 47-second incident, Section 9A. It explained what Randall had, that I should count in my head, not freak out, and usually nothing would happen. There was some additional explanation, too. If your engine does not immediately come to life after the waiting period has concluded, then close your eyes and hide. The things in the forest will eventually lose interest. Above all, remain in your vehicle. If you leave at any point during the hunting ceremony, they will know your scent. You will never rest again. Part 2. Absolutely, under no circumstances may you ever pick up a hitchhiker. It's common for unfamiliar persons to approach truck drivers on Route 333 asking for a lift. It does not matter who the person in question may be. It does not matter if they are a nursing mother with a newborn child or a lost preteen in great distress. Never, for any reason, under any conditions, may you provide one of said persons with requested rides. You won't survive if you do. Employee Handbook, Section 3. Why are you doing this? That was the thing my girlfriend of 3 years asked me repeatedly in the days leading up to my departure. The start day for my new trucking gig drew closer. I'd be moving to a totally different state. I did just graduate. I do need a job. Trucking has nothing to do with your major. Stay here. To be fair, most jobs have nothing to do with English. That's sort of the issue. Day after day, though, Myra continued to ask why I was doing this. I could have gone with the easy answer, the money, which really had been why I'd signed my contract in the first place. But the closer my start date got, the more I was sure that wasn't the whole reason I was leaving. How did I put into words this growing feeling inside me? That I couldn't stay, that I wasn't happy there, or anywhere really, and how it was slowly suffocating me. And while it wasn't her fault, she also wasn't the solution as much as she wished she could be. So I had to go. I had to. But yeah, I'm fairly sure what I actually did say was just money. Sue me. You can still call me, she said the night before my flight. We'll talk every day while you're driving, yeah? I don't know, I said. I think probably not. There's a whole section in the employee handbook about how I can only use the radio. So? They won't know. How are we supposed to do long distance if we can't talk? I remembered the bloodied corpse of the other interviewee skewered to his hood. I remembered the scratch of my own face pressed to the pavement as things skittered around my rig. How could I explain why I had to follow the phone rule too? I stayed silent, her voice got soft. We're breaking up, aren't we? I think we are. For a second I thought Myra might slap me. She's not mean, but she's impulsive. The type of girl who has a midlife crisis every other Tuesday and frequently shows up with a brand new life philosophy tattooed on her thigh, one of the things I loved about her. But it wasn't always easy to predict what drastic things she'd do to cope. Instead, she hugged me, kissed me on the cheek, and left. At the door to my apartment, she paused. Goodbye, Brendan. In the job preparation packet, my new trucking company was very clear on one thing: read the employee handbook. So I did what anybody would do in this situation. I skimmed it. I'm sure at this point, those of you who read my last post are clucking your tongues disapprovingly. Really, Brendan? One dead body wasn't enough? Didn't you already accidentally break a rule last time? But let me ask you this. What was the last job you worked where you read the entire employee handbook back to front? That's what I thought. The parts I did read had some weird stuff in them. There was your typical information, what to pack for overnighters and general rig maintenance guidelines, but also some odder things. Sections on what to do if the moon forgot to show up on a night it was supposed to, or explanations on which gas stations were normal and which ones had rules to obey, like don't stare anybody in the eyes, not even if they're speaking directly at you. There was a whole page with a bullet list on which FM radio stations were safe and which might put you into a trance for hours, make you crave non-food substances. Never speed. Read a sentence in Section 5A. If you do, it may draw the attention of the Highway Patrol. They are not Highway Patrol. They will not give you a ticket. You do not want to find out what they will give you as punishment instead. Basically, I was around 95% sure I would die a morbidly gruesome death, my first real time on Route 333. More of a passing interest than an actual fear, which probably just demonstrates how damaged my psyche was. I'm happy to report. However, my first haul went off without a hitch. The first section was Redwood Groves, followed by hours of desert pockmarked with run-down towns, and finally some twisting mountain canyons. I crashed in the sleeper after delivering my haul at an abandoned building. That's where they told me to leave it. I woke up early the next morning to finish the route and did so alive and well. My truck stopped for a minute, 47 seconds, at the same part as last time, but there was no additional visit from the things in the forest. Randall hadn't actually seemed overly concerned when I explained to him how I had in fact gotten out of the truck during the interview, so I chose not to be too worried for now. Back at the truck yard, I dangled my keys in front of Randall. He whistled. 14 hours there and back. That is simply unheard of. Can I ask you what I actually delivered? No, you may not. He smiled cheerily and plucked the keys from me. I was still having a hard time figuring Randall out. Either he was a passive-aggressive jerk, or he simply had an odd sense of humor. Either way, he hadn't seemed too concerned when the other man in my interview had gotten savagely murdered, so that probably tipped the scales towards jerk. My next few weeks went almost equally smooth. Still no incidents in the Redwood section. Randall and the other dispatchers started sending me on longer and longer trips down Route 333. They would last 3, sometimes 4 days at a time. I didn't mind. I was getting massive amounts of overtime, but I did get the odd sense the dispatchers were almost excited about the fact I was going so far. I knew there was a part in the employee handbook about how the road would expand over time. A drive that took me 4 hours might take another driver 8 or more. Eventually, there would be a breaking point, a rapid expansion, where a section of the road that took you minutes would now take weeks. From tidbits of conversations with other drivers, I got the impression there were truckers who hadn't quit in time, who'd been stuck on Route 333 for years trying to get back. Frankly, most days I didn't care much. For the first time in years, my racing thoughts were finally slowing. My chronic overthinking was fading away to a sense of pleasant numbness. Whatever happened, however this road worked, was the same to me. Before I'd started trucking, I'd been worried that the loneliness would get to me. Now, the only thing I worried about anymore was about how entirely fine I was being this alone. I'd stopped for fuel at a Petro speed when I heard it. At first, I couldn't entirely place the voice, and I just continued filling up. Something nagged the recesses of my mind, though, a thin thread yanking and yanking. Finally, I twisted to see who belonged to the voice across the parking lot. I gaped. It was Myra, my ex-girlfriend, talking animatedly with what looked like one of the Petro speed workers. As I got closer, I could make out their conversation. "What do you mean there's no mechanics in the area?" Myra jabbed a finger at her car. "How am I supposed to keep driving in that thing?" "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the nearest town is hours away. You'll have to call a towing company." I don't want to call a towing company. I want to find somebody here. I understand that, ma'am, but... Myra? I asked. She whirled, looking as if she was going to snap at me too, then realized who I was. Her hands flew to her mouth, then she sprinted at me and threw herself in my arms. I laughed. This is insane! What are you doing here? Looking for you. Looking for... Myra, you haven't even called me? Yes, I did! I've called a dozen times the last few days, and you never picked up. I got worried. I wanted to see you. I wouldn't have picked up. I was on the third day of a 4-day trip. I didn't even bring my phone anymore to avoid the temptation of using it. Something like this, her somehow tracking me down to the middle of nowhere, felt exactly like the sort of impulsive thing Myra would do. Entirely insane, but the exact reason I fell in love with her. Amazing luck, she said. If my car hadn't died, I wouldn't have stopped here. Can I ride with you? We talked for hours. It was just like before. We laughed and sang along to the limited country songs we knew at ear-shattering volumes. After a few hours, she grabbed my hand and I didn't stop her. I thought I was fine with the loneliness, but having her here physically with me, I knew I'd minded more than I let myself believe. I never thought you'd want to talk with me again, I told her. At first, I didn't. She stroked my knuckle with her thumb. I don't think I'll ever stop loving you. I felt amazing. No, better than amazing. I felt happy. I glowed the whole evening. All up until we stopped at a rest stop for the night, and she slipped into the building for the bathroom. Everything's good, I reported on my handheld radio as part of my nightly check-in. Yes, somehow this radio was capable of connecting back with dispatch. I'd given up wondering how. You sound chipper, Randall said. Crazy story, actually. I told him about running into Myra, about how I was giving her a lift back to civilization, and how good it was to see her. He went quiet. You know you aren't supposed to pick up hitchhikers, he said. I didn't. She's not a hitchhiker. I know her. Did she ask you for a ride? No, I offered her a ride. But I hadn't, had I? I would have, but she'd gotten to asking first. A slow, deadly chill spread up my back. Who are you talking to? Myra climbed into the cab in PJs. Nobody. Nobody at all. She fell asleep instantly, cuddled up next to me. This was Myra of all people. I knew her. She wasn't a stranger. I hadn't broken any rules. Why wasn't I allowed to just be happy for once? I forced myself to close my eyes, steady my breaths, and drift off to sleep. I woke up hours later. It was a gradual wake-up. Something wet was on my face. My eyes didn't snap open. Instead, for some inexplicable reason, I cracked them open just a fraction, thin enough they still appeared closed. She was staring at me. In the early morning light, Myra watched me with an enormous grin across her face, fully awake. She leaned in and ran her tongue from my chin up to my forehead. I love you, she whispered. Do you need the bathroom? I asked hours later. We were stopped at a rest stop a mere hour or two from the end of Route 333. The last few hours, the conversation had been tense. She hadn't wanted to get out to stretch her legs once. I'd pushed. She'd gotten annoyed. I'm good. You haven't gone all day. You didn't go yesterday either, she giggled, like I'd told some joke. She reached out to my face and ran a single sharpened nail along my cheek. It's almost like you want to get rid of me. I swallowed and pretended to ignore the drip of blood from my chin. Of course not. I took the keys with me when I went to fill up the tank. She pressed her face up against the glass the whole time, smiling down at me, waving incessantly. When I climbed back in, she giggled. Don't take so long, she said. I missed you. We drove. She became increasingly cuddly. Her grip when she held my hand, it was tight. Too tight. There would be bruises tomorrow. She started leaning across the center divide to kiss my cheek and rake her teeth against my neck. Stop, I said. No. I stopped 3 more times to stretch my legs. You should too, I said each time, but she refused. She wouldn't leave. Stop it. She growled the 4th time we stopped. Her face distorted into a grotesque mask, then softened back into a smile. I'll miss you. Myra. I took a breath. There's actually something I need to ask you. Yes? It's not something I can ask you in a truck, though. Her face scrunched in annoyance. Her breath grew harsh and gravelly. "These last 2 days have been amazing," I said. "They've made me realize how much I missed you and need to be with you. The thing I need to ask you, I have to kneel for it." A soft smile tugged at her lips. Finally, she relented. She followed me from the truck. As we walked to a clearing in the forest, her steps grew more erratic and random, more excited perhaps. The skin on her face looked less smooth and more like plastic, like something designed in a factory. "Close your eyes," I whispered, and sunk my hand into my pocket showingly. She did. Then I bolted for the truck. It was seconds before she realized what was happening, and even longer before she started after me. By the time the not Myra, reached me, the doors were already locked. I was already rolling away. Her face was something entirely inhuman. Her eyes dripped like melted wax from her empty sockets, and her hair peeled off in clumps. "No," she screeched. "I love you. Don't leave me." But I did, for the second time. When I returned to the truck yard, I said nothing of what had happened. Randall didn't either, though he seemed visibly surprised to see me. He simply accepted my keys with a wink. Jerk, I decided. Definitely a jerk. The first thing I did when I got in my car was make a phone call. The person on the other end picked up after the second ring. Neither of us spoke. We breathed into the receiver, waiting for the other to initiate. "Hi," I said. "Hi." How could I ever have forgotten what Myra's true voice sounded like? Nothing in her tone suggested she was anything but safe. Something I already knew, but actually confirming it let me relax for the first time in hours. "Brendan," she said. "Why are you calling?" "I don't entirely know. Are you all right?" she asked. "I'm not sure." She was silent. "I was too. You should know, I know it doesn't matter, but I think you should know I'm with somebody new," she said. "Okay. That's it?" "I think so." "Yeah." Myra huffed out a laugh, though I was entirely certain she thought none of this was funny. "Why did you do this to me?" she snapped. I opened my mouth, then closed it. "Nothing," she asked when I didn't reply. "Really?" "Brendan, you left after 3 years, no warning, and you never really even told me why. You haven't called once. You haven't texted, not even to tell me you're all right. I loved you and you threw me away. Decent people don't do that. I get that you have your own stuff going on, but that's a terrible way to treat somebody." "It is." I sighed and leaned my head against the steering wheel. "Myra, I think there's something broken about me." "Don't be dramatic." "I'm not. Something's always been broken about me and I don't know how to fix it. I don't even know what it is, but I am sorry. That wasn't fair of me to leave like that." "You deserve to hate me." A pause. "I could never hate you," she whispered. We hung up. Before either of us could start crying, I suspected. For a few minutes, sitting there after the call, I considered quitting. I should have been afraid of Route 333. After everything I'd seen on it, after the bodies and the creatures that weren't quite human, it would make sense for me to leave. Anybody in my situation would be considering the same. Anybody smarter than me probably would have quit. I couldn't, though. I was afraid of the road, of the things that prowled behind the trees and waited in empty gas station shower stalls. I was afraid of the things that perhaps knew my scent and the thing that had slept next to me in bed. Of course I was. I was just afraid of the real world more. So I stayed. I kept driving. And one day, when the road expands past days long into weeks long, possibly even years long, I will keep driving. Part 3. Be wary of sleeping with windows open on nights with high cloud coverage. If weather exceeds normal temperatures, utilize your internal cab AC unit. If no AC unit is available, cracked windows are permitted. Openings must not be wide enough to allow through a hand. The faceless man has learned how to unlock doors from the inside. Employee Handbook. Section 8, okay, guys. I really should clarify a few things at this point. The first of which being that while it is true, I may not have immediately read the entire employee handbook before the incidents of my last post, I had read most of it. Chapter headings, section descriptions, general overview, etc. Even if I'd read the entire part about hitchhikers, it wouldn't have prevented the whole incident with Not Myra. And plus, I'll remind you that I'm not actually dead yet, so I'm not entirely helpless. The main issue with the employee handbook is that it's vague. Sure, there are rules and guidelines, but I get the impression Randall and the rest of the dispatchers don't entirely know what's going on either. This road, Route 333, makes its own rules. It doesn't always care to inform us about them. Okay, and second thing, I have actually gone to therapy before. I'd prefer not to get into it much with a bunch of anonymous online Redditors, no offense, but it wasn't especially helpful. For some people, I know therapy makes things harder first before it makes them better, but for me, it sort of just made things harder and harder and harder. Something about the vulnerability of it. I've tried a few medications too, but I've heard some people are pretty resistant to them. I suspect that's me. Even so, thank you for all your concerns. For real. Now, on to something more related to Route 333 and the many ways I repeatedly almost get myself killed because, let's be real, that's why you're here, not to hear about my ever-degrading mental state. Mainly, I realize I haven't said much about the other truckers. I'm sure to nobody's surprise, I mainly avoided the other drivers the first few weeks at my job. Every few hours, I'd pass one of them on Route 333 and give a small wave. But apart from that, I was in no rush to make new friends, especially not ones in their 40s and 50s. If it weren't for the faceless man, I might have never gotten to know them at all. There's not much of a section in the employee handbook on the faceless man. The only mention is when it says, the faceless man has learned how to unlock doors from the inside, like I said. Vague. Ominous too, though, so I made sure to close my windows and lock the doors every night before laying down on the cab sleeper. Generally, I'd leave the windows shut even if it was sweltering, but one night it got especially sweltering. There weren't many clouds in the sky. I'd already tossed and turned in my sweaty sheets for an hour before I decided to let in some air. Just a crack. I even wiggled my fingers in the open space to make sure that's all that could get through. When I tried to sleep this time, there was enough of a breeze to let me. The next time I woke, it was still night. The moon was covered by clouds, but enough light made it through to illuminate the interior of the cab. Clouds. I sat up. There was no reason to be afraid. I knew this. I hadn't broken any rules. The doors were locked and secured. Even so, I glanced first at the driver's side window and then the passenger. My entire existence jerked to a stop. It stared at me through the glass. At least that's what I assumed it was doing. The thing had no eyes, no ears, no hair, and no mouth. The only feature reminiscent of a living creature's were two snake-like slits in the middle of the face. A nose of some sort, it faced me. It smelled. I could audibly hear the inhale even through the door, and the slits widened to holes the size of chestnuts. Light from the truck stop caught on each individual hair, almost like teeth. Hello? I tried, but no sound came out. I forced my throat to clear and tried again. Do you need something? Are you the faceless man? Right. Because of course the thing with no ears or mouth is going to hear you and respond. And then I thought, maybe the name Faceless Man is somehow offensive. So I immediately asked, unless you prefer to be called something different. Because apparently I'd literally already forgotten this thing could not hear me. If you can't tell, I tend to overthink whilst in uncomfortable situations. By this point, I'd already experienced enough oddities of the road that I was content to just curl there in the corner and wait until the thing left. That's exactly what I would have done, if the faceless man hadn't reached a hand with 7 fingers up and tapped the glass. Quick clarification. When I say fingers, that's probably precisely what you envision, fingers. What I really mean is 7 bleach-white protrusions, each a meter long, with dozens of joints and gnarled nails curling from their tips. I watched in horror as each of the fingers felt along the glass. Found the lip, then snaked inwards. Nope, I told it. That's not happening. You're not doing that. I scrambled for my pants, then decided it really wasn't worth it, and clambered for the driver's seat in my boxers. The faceless man inhaled again and swiveled to follow my movement. Out! I commanded and twisted the key. The truck roared to life. The ivory fingers felt around, sliding past the unlock button and heading directly for the inner handle. One last chance, I warned, even though it was entirely clear by now the thing wasn't able to hear me. When it predictably continued to not be able to hear me, I did what anybody would do in this situation. I rolled up the window. They flattened. Each cylindrical finger compressed where the glass closed into them, and the thing outside shuddered in pain. It yanked at them, trying to escape but unable. I gave it 2 more seconds, then cracked the window again. The faceless man yanked its fingers from my car, exhaled greenish globs of what I suspect was snot on my window, then skittered away. Needless to say, I got an early start that morning. While that whole incident did shake me up and made me demand a rig with internal AC, non-negotiable, it reminded me of something. The faceless man had tracked my movements by smelling me. Maybe that was just a coincidence. Probably smells were how it was drawn to any human. But there was already another subset of road dwellers who apparently knew my scent. Could the faceless man somehow be connected? The employee handbook said very little about the topic, and Randall hadn't seemed overly talkative when I'd asked him about the things in the forest. I approached a few co-workers instead. They explained that no, the faceless man probably wasn't connected to the things in the forest. They were confined to the forest. He was confined to cloudy nights. He was just a harmless pest, basically like a raccoon, looking for somewhere to warm up, though he would occasionally suffocate people by shoving his fingers down their throat, so maybe not entirely harmless. They also told me not to trust any energy drink brands I didn't recognize at gas stations and to avoid coffee at late-night diners. The coffee wasn't dangerous. It just was nasty. I started talking with the other drivers at the truck yard before and after hauls. We'd chat when we stopped for showers at the same time, and radio greetings when we passed each other on the road. Slowly, I got to know some of them. Deidre was a divorced mom of 3. She hated she had to be away from her kids for such long stretches, but this job's pay was the only way she'd be able to send her oldest to college. Then there was Vikram. He immigrated with his family from India about 10 years ago. He tried taxiing in Chicago, but the pay was crap and the people were rude. He liked long hauling much better. Chris was more of a short hauler. He'd been on Route 333 for almost 15 years, longer than anybody else. He'd started like me with an extremely short drive time, and the road had taken its sweet time expanding for him. He mainly did short trips now to be safe, 1 or 2 day hauls. That's how long it took him to get out of the Redwood section to the first turnaround point. From my interview, about 10x slower than me still. Even so, he could still cover ground quicker than some of the others. I'll be done in a year or 2, he confided in me once over breakfast at a diner. They pay me more than anybody, but takes me longer to get anything done. Besides, don't want to risk getting lane locked. That's what we call it, lane locked. Usually, Route 333 expands at an even pace, but eventually, without warning, it will one day explode in length. What took hours to drive the previous day might take weeks or even years now. There's signs to watch out for. Less stars in the sky than usual. Rest stop attendants getting colder to you. Expansion at an increasing pace. But it's impossible to predict the exact moment lane locking happens. There's always a risk of getting taken unawares. It's like a fever breaking, Deidre explained to me. We're the virus. It takes a minute for the highway to get immune to us. But once it does, it happens all at once. There's a small stretch far out into the desert where it's common to see a neon orange flatbed heading the direction of the real world. Sometimes it's missing. It slips into pockets of the road the rest of us luckily haven't accessed yet, but always, eventually, you see the flatbed again. Same area, still driving. How long has he been going now? I asked Chris one morning. 6, maybe 7 years? Al's a good guy. We'll pull over and talk occasionally. His time came quicker than most. How much ground has Al covered? Chris exhaled through his mouth and shook his head. To you? A few miles, maybe? He'll never make it back, not in 100 years. He has a family, though. He refuses to quit. Some do, though. Some accept they're stuck, that it's not worth years of their life trying to get out. And find a new sort of life on Route 333, people like Tiff. The first time I met Tiff, I was getting coffee at 3 in the morning at the Wayside Diner. It's true. The coffee at late-night diners on Route 333 is truly, utterly disgusting, but I was desperate for any sort of caffeine, however crappy. I was only a few hours from the truck yard terminal, and if possible, I try not to sleep on the highway more than absolutely necessary. Call me high maintenance, but I'm still not a fan of waking up to see Mr. Nose sniffing longingly at me. A middle-aged waitress delivered my coffee and waited there as I sipped it. What the? I looked up at her. This is actually palatable. Not exactly a compliment, but I'll take it. The woman slid in the booth across from me. You must be the new one. Brendan, right? Yeah? I wasn't used to people on Route 333 knowing who I was or really even acknowledging me. It was still unclear from the handbook and my interactions with them if they were actual people or just sort of there. This woman seemed different, though. I'm Tiff, former employee turned waitress. I've heard of you. The others, they mention you. Still remember me, do they? Glad to hear I'm not entirely forgotten. Almost never visit me anymore. You work here? She shrugged. When I want. Staffing lets me fill in. Not so sure if they're letting me as much as I tell them I work here and they believe me. Doesn't pay anything, but it's not like I need money anymore, just like chatting. I much prefer real people, though. She clasped her hands and muscles flexed along her fully tattooed arms. Tiff was exactly the type of tough woman you'd imagine would become a trucker. Well, that mixed with the sort of desperate, lonely friendliness only found at an old folks' home. Tell me, she said, what was your first reaction when you realized Route 333 wasn't a normal road? I always ask that. I don't think I've ever screamed at an interviewer before, she laughed. And after you started working, it was a bit weird, I guess? I don't know. I just sort of accepted it. A bit weird? She eyed me, then reached for my cup and took a swig. You seem like somebody going through something. True enough. We talked for hours that night. She grabbed us some pie from the counter and she asked about my life and talked about hers. She'd been offered a position on Route 333 for years before she actually accepted. She'd heard the rumors. She knew the sort of dangers it offered. When she finally took a position, it was only because her daughter got a brain tumor. Treatment was expensive. Her daughter didn't survive, but after that, Tiff kept hauling to stave off the loneliness. I told her I understood. She told me that no, I didn't actually. Seeing how I was a 20-odd-something puppy boy, but that I probably had my own similar thing I did understand, that was close enough. So she wasn't offended. By the time we called it quits, the sun was already rising. I don't remember everything we talked about, but I do remember myself standing up, patting her shoulder and saying, I'll talk to Randall. We'll find some way for you to get out of here. Her face went dark. You shouldn't have said that. Not where the road can hear you. I slept a few hours, then got up around noon. Before I left, I decided to take a shower. The water in the personal shower room was cold. I waited a few minutes for it to heat up, but when it didn't, I decided that realistically there were people dying from parasites in other countries, and a cold shower likely wouldn't result in a grueling end. It did still suck, though. I finished that thing in a minute flat, then twisted the faucet to off. The water didn't stop. I tried twisting it the other way. The water only got stronger, and the drain in the floor, it had stopped working. Freezing water was building up in a puddle. Soon, it overflowed the lip of the shower and onto the tile. I sighed, dressed, and went for the door. My shower sandals slapped all the way there. It was locked. I flipped the lock back and forth, but any way I attempted, the door wouldn't budge. I pounded at it until the cold touch of water licked my ankles. It was around then I realized I was in trouble. Hey! I screamed repeatedly, but nobody seemed to hear me. The water was at my knees now. How is it coming so fast? I waded back to the shower, tried the handle again, then did my first truly stupid thing of this incident. You all know by now I'm bound to do something stupid eventually. I bound my towel around the shower head to stop the flow, which didn't work a bit. Then I proceeded to slip, trip, and yank the towel with me. The shower head tore off. The rate of water doubled. It was at my shoulders now. The water started pumping out brown and sludgy. It was too murky to see through, and my feet, things began to brush against them. Just my clothes, I told myself, but since when did my clothes have scales? I pounded at the door. I stood on the handle to keep my face above the water. There had to be some way out. I couldn't die like this. There was only a foot of breathable air now, then 6 inches, then 1. I gasped a final breath as the slimy scaled things wrapped around my ankles and jerked me down. I flailed to escape, but where would I go? There was no more air. The entire room was full of glacier water. My vision started dimming. I felt my throat convulsing, begging me to breathe. I couldn't resist anymore. The door flew open. Hundreds of gallons of water sloshed out of the bathing room into the hallway. It slammed me against the wall, but I gasped and struggled to my feet. When I stood, the hallway was dry. The shower room was dry. My dirty clothes were in a heap on the bench where I'd left them, totally, you guessed it, dry. The only thing that was sopping wet was me. Tiff walked into the hallway a few seconds later with a garbage bag. She glanced from me and my sopping clothes to the open door of the shower room, then back to me. "I told you you shouldn't have said that. What just happened?" I demanded, followed by a fountain of colorful words. A threat. "The road doesn't like to give up things it's claimed for its own. Don't try to help me escape." Brendan, with that she shook her head, stepped over the puddle at my feet and carried the trash down the hallway. It took me some time to change my clothes, dry off, and even more time to calm down. Once I had, I was finally able to think. The way Tiff had told me not to help her had been calm, resigned. She'd given up years ago. She'd accepted this truck stop and its miniature diner was her life now because the only alternative was something worse. The road had claimed her. It wanted her to stay, and it would hurt anyone who tried to take her, except it couldn't hurt me. That realization, that shining understanding, more golden than any moment of happiness, filled me with hope. Route 333 couldn't hurt me because I had nothing I cared about. It could kill me, but so what? Why should that bother me? My life didn't matter to me, which meant I could defy the road all I wanted. Tiff might have given up, but I hadn't. I was going to get her out or die trying. I'd finally found something I hadn't had in years, a reason.